Hi, thanks for being here. I wanted to start out. My goal today is just to give us an overview of a bunch of discussions going on around philosophy of work. And so let's start out with a parable. Do folks know Aesop's grasshopper? This is the one who he wouldn't work, and so he's going to starve in the winter, right? And the ants are like, haha, you should have worked harder. You deserve it. Anyway, so in Bernard Suits's book, The Grasshopper, he gives him a really nice dying speech. And the grasshopper goes like, look, when people tell my story, the point of the parable shouldn't be the ant's triumph, but the grasshopper's tragedy. For one cannot help reflecting that if there were no winners to guard against, the grasshopper would not get his comeuppance, nor the ant his shabby victory. Right? The life of the grasshopper would be vindicated and that of the ant absurd. Absurd in like the Sisyphean sense of like, why are you working, right? But there are winters to guard against, his disciple Prudence protested. No doubt. Still, it's possible with accelerating advances in technology, the time will come when there are in fact no winters. So, my timing may be a bit off, but my way of life is not wrong in principle, he says. All right. So this is like an amazing, I recommend this book to everyone I can. It's really a philosophical dialogue about trying to give a definition of playing games. Here's the simpler definition that the grasshopper gives, where he says, playing a game is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. And you can see at the heart of this is the value of autonomy, of getting to do what I want, right? And he thinks like playing games is what economically and psychologically autonomous individuals would do, maybe the only thing they do, right? Like if we think of utopia as a place where there's nothing that you have to do, where all your practical needs are accounted for, anything you did would be a free choice. You'd spend all your time at play, right? And so in utopia, the only thing left to do would be to play games. And so playing games is the meaning of life. It's the ideal of the existence, he concludes. He is the grasshopper, right? This is an awesome book. But he's brought back from the dead briefly, and he has a nightmare, and then he dies again. And he imagines, like in his utopia, like John Stryver just gets bored of utopia, and he goes to the computer in charge, and he says, "I want to be a carpenter. Let me build how like I could just like snap my fingers, and the computer would make me the house of my dreams, but I want to do it with myself, right?" And the grasshopper goes like, "That's just playing another game." Right? Because there's no need for the house. You're taking on unnecessary obstacles just to have something to do. So the weird thing is once there is this super competent supercomputer in charge, right? Looks like everything is a game, like even science, right? William Seeker wants to be a scientist, but everything's figured out. And so it's just like doing a crossword puzzle where the solution is already known and, the answers will come out the next day, but still you try to solve the puzzle today. So here's the grasshopper's like nightmare. Like after a while, the strivers and the seekers conclude that if their lives are merely games, their lives are scarcely worth living. And so they like try to convince everyone man-made houses are better, right? Carpentry and science, these aren't games. We need this to survive. And they destroy the computer. They destroy utopia rather than destroy themselves, right? So the grasshopper goes, well, most people will not want to spend their lives playing games. And then he dies for real. Okay, cool. So here's two Western histories of work. Where do our ideas around work come from? First up, we'll look at Lars Svensson. This is a Norwegian philosopher who's published like a dozen books. He starts his book on work by saying that without work, he'd lose his mind. His father is completely incapable of retiring, and a world without work would fill them both with despair. Okay, cool. So this guy's an ant, right? This guy just wants to work, right? And look, he's right. Work does a lot for us. It marks our identities, our relationships. We get like a sense of purpose. And if there were no work, our entire lives would have to be reimagined, which is like maybe not bad, but it's a lot. So why do we work? We want to change the external world to get the necessities of life so we can survive. The weird thing, though, is as time has gone on, the relationship between work and survival has become looser and looser. You probably won't starve like immediately, So here's his history of work. And basically, work is going to go from just a meaningless curse to a meaningful vocation. It's going to become better and better over time. Work's always improving, right? So we can start with the Greeks who hate work. They're so wealthy just to be philosophers anyway, right? By the Middle Ages, we get an aspect of like duty in addition to curse. So now it has a religious import that really starts to expand. Once we get to like the Reformation, once there are Protestants around, work becomes much more mundane, like as in much more about the world. So Martin Luther thinks you should devote yourself to your profession to serve God. Calvin thinks you have a duty to earn as much money as possible, which is weird, but it's later reconstructed by Weber as like, this is an effort to comfort yourself. Because if you believe in predestination, that it's already decided who's going to hell, maybe making a bunch of money is a sign that God likes you, right? Okay. So now work is like to comfort you on earth, right? Or, John Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, we've all heard this, right? God helps those who help themselves, right? We notice the role of self-interest is more primary now, right? And through the Enlightenment, work becomes more and more, Kant says, yes, we have a need for work or we'd be bored to death. Oh, work is just useful to keep us busy and keep us from feeling lifeless, right? Adam Smith, work gives us something to do or we'd be stupid and ignorant. Oh, okay, cool, right? This is way more mundane, right? Here's the face of Victorianism, Carlyle, right? Work is noble and sacred. It's idleness that's despair, right? But we're already getting some ambivalence because Mill's a utilitarian, right? He just cares about happiness. So now it's pretty contingent. Like, is work good? I don't know. Like, does it produce happiness? Right. So now the like value of work is more in question. And there's this like decisive romantic turn where the duty becomes one that we owe to ourselves, right? Everyone should aim for the work that gives them the most meaning and satisfaction on personal terms so they can realize their own individual potential to the fullest. And we're still very much in this, Svensson says. So like, even when we get to Karl Marx, right? And it's like, oh, well, in work, we reshape the outer world as a manifestation of ourselves, and we can recognize ourselves in our work. Unless, the capitalist is telling you to do this 10,000 times a day to make bobby pins. And then the problem isn't that your work is objectifying. Like, work is supposed to objectify ideas in your brain and make them in the world. But now it's not your ideas, right? It's some other guys. And that's what's alienating, right? You've become like a machine. We'll return to that thought, right? So anyway, today we're still very much gripped by like, what's the right job for me that fits who I am, right? And work is so good for us. Actually, like we work less than ever before, and it's good for your health. And you know what's bad for your health is being unemployed, Svensson says. That's way worse. Look at all these studies and correlations, right? And he goes like, oh, there's external goods of work, like getting money and status, but it's the internal goods, like the satisfaction. That's what really counts. Be careful though, because you might work too much because work is just so satisfying, right? But he thinks like our real sin is like, it's not that we work too hard, it's we play too hard. And we could work way less if we just settled. But instead we want to shop. Okay, that's his social analysis. All right, great. So now here's an American anthropologist, David Graeber. Let's get like a competing perspective, right? So you may know this, but Keynes thought that in 1930, by the year 2000, we'd have a 15-hour work week. Like automation would just make everyone's lives better. Why didn't that happen? Why do we have all the, here are just some jobs that you might think are kind of bullshit. Why do we have all these jobs, or it's not clear what they're doing or what they're good for, or why the hell they exist, right? So he goes, what if these jobs are useless and the people who hold them know it? And there's like, this is a spoiler, right? But they're just branches of non-production in the economy, right? So he defines a bullshit job as a job that's so pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious, even the employee can't justify their own job. Like, why does your job exist? They can't give you a good reason, but they feel obliged to pretend, which is like a tremendous source of spiritual violence in their lives, he says. Anyway, so here's his history of work, and he is more of a grasshopper, right? So we can start in Eden or with Prometheus again, and yeah, work is punishment, but work always has this divine creative force as well. Like, you do get to transform reality. And all of these ideas, like if you're impressed by like economics and stuff, these ideas are old. Hobbes is, it's just, we're secularizing very old ideas. That's not what's new. You know what's new is in the Middle Ages, servants were paid, and wage labor was like a respectable first phase of life while you were learning your trade. What we consider paid work and education were just the same thing. It was about learning self-discipline, becoming an adult. And yeah, work's punishing, but also there is this creative and godlike aspect you might especially feel as a noble being bathed by some, wage laborers, right? And then capitalism happened. What's capitalism? There's a zillion definitions. Here's a pretty useful one. It's the gradual transformation of relations of service into permanent relations of wage labor. So now you have an emergent class, the proletariat, that's trapped in permanent social adolescence. And Graeber goes, you're not going to understand the history of work as just a series of ideas that a bunch of like men say in a line. Like you gotta look at these historical material conditions, right? And this explains why we're so worried about the moral comportment of the poor, the welfare queens, all this, bullshit, right? Because the poor are frustrated, irresponsible adolescents that can't be trusted, right? We still have these ideas. Oh yeah, the labor theory of value was just like common sense before certain American philanthropists engaged on a very concerted like propaganda effort, and of course, here's eugenics again, right? It's always okay. So like, yeah, like our thinking about this has been pointedly distorted by some people who really benefited from things. That's weird. Anyway, we're left today with the paradox of modern work, where most people's sense of dignity and self-worth is caught up in working for a living, and most people hate their jobs. And that's kind of weird, but he thinks these are deeply related. Like Graeber goes, workers feel good because they hate their jobs and they're willing to suffer and work hard, and that proves their value, right? That's what being a grown-up is. So why do we still have bullshit jobs today? Here's his analysis. It's like, well, the ruling class has figured out a happy and productive population with free time is really dangerous. Think of the 60s. Never again. We have to make work an end and meaning in itself. Keep your head down. Tremendous spiritual violence. That's a term he keeps coming back to over and over. Okay, I want to make a sort of crude distinction between technical and social technologies. This won't be very rigorous, but here's Harry. By the way, if you haven't read this book, if you're going to read one book I talked about, I think this book is amazing. Harry Braverman, Labor and Monopoly Capital. Okay, so technical technologies are like transistors, microchips. These aim at like producing a narrow technical result, whereas social technologies like management or democracy aim at shaping broader social outcomes. And his whole point is like, hey, these are developed in tandem by people with the money. Like the worker is systematically robbed of a craft heritage by all these technical advances, but they double as social technologies in how they're deployed, right? To maintain relations of power. So yeah, let's talk about Taylor. I don't know, do folks know about Taylorism? Like, this is like the emergence of scientific management, how best to control alienated labor under capitalist conditions. This guy is a menace. But he realizes like, we won't realize to the full the productive potential of these workers until capital has control of the labor process. And I do say capital because like, the transition into factory work and all this, it looks like alienation from the perspective of the worker, but it's just the problem of management for the capitalist. Okay, interesting. So for example, he does things like a fair day's work is all the work you can do without injury through your lifetime. Why is that a maximum? Why is anything else like wasteful? Well, there might be some ideology going on. I don't know. Yeah, right. And so like, this is how long you should take to punch a time clock in minutes. We did the science, right? We're going to tell you exactly how to do your job so you can be more efficient. And scientific management is a social technology, right? It lets you control and plan the most productive way to do all this work. And then you can divide the work and give it to the least skilled worker who's capable of doing it to minimize wages. And then in the long run, de-skilling everyone keeps them helplessly dependent on capital for employment. And there are no downsides. This works great every time. Okay, well, it is a social technology. All they lack is a chain, the vice president said of a room of key punch operators who are all women, because you can pay. This shows they're supposed to type 20,000 keys per hour. This job is no different from a factory job, except I don't get paid as much. Yeah, it seems terrible, right? This is really bad, actually. Because just the fact that you have a brain is a threat to capital, because you might go off script. We have a plan and you might do something else. So yeah, we're viewing humans in machine terms as things to be used. I don't have time to go through his 17-stage history of the machine, but there are two ways of thinking about machines. One is the engineering approach, where we focus on mechanisms and how it works. And the other is like a social approach, where we go like, how does this change our lives and how we relate to labor and each other, right? Marx is going to take the social approach, right? And he goes like, well, the machine starts out as a replacement for the workman. It just does the same work. And the function of the machine is so there will be fewer workers over time, like in the long run, right? And so what's key in the social approach is the manner in which the operations are controlled. Is the machine lets you get control over how labor will be done, because that's how the machine works. Come here and sit, and here's your station, right? That also makes the machine the instrument of capital. And you wouldn't notice any of this in the engineering literature, right? If you're just looking at internal mechanisms, you won't see these social transformations as they take place. Hi, we're doing Marxism. This is a formula for how fast it should take your eye to move and then like refocus in 100,000ths of an hour. Okay, cool. Yeah, so machines are like an alien power, and their interests are antagonistic because the machine's interests are the interests of capital, right? This tracks. And machinery lets management do by wholly mechanical means what was previously done by organizational and disciplinary means, right? This is like built in. The technical and social technologies can't be separated. So initially, when you introduce a machine, it takes more skill to operate. But in the long run, it takes less and less and less. We're trying to deliberately render skilled workers as obsolete as we can because they demand higher pay. We're more dependent on them, right? We can't control them totally. These new things are just fundamentally easier to operate. Oh yeah, because we're just chasing profitability. To hell with every other social effect that happens. So what happens when you do this? Well, you have fewer truly productive workers. You have more workers who can be utilized and end up in wasteful or no employment. And just more and more of society depends on fewer and fewer people who actually know what's going on. Oh, that's cool. And just productivity keeps going and there's no end to it. What's weird is that this is exactly when bullshit jobs multiply. Even as we're at our maximum total productivity, we're going, well, why should a manager open the file drawer? We could just pay like a woman secretary way less, right? And so suddenly you just get more and more secretaries until there are so many it threatens the balance sheet, right? But like bullshit jobs are actually like a structural feature that you would predict from this, right? And the limit, though, the truly automatic machine wouldn't need any skill, any human intervention at all. You would just like patrol or just be there as the stand-in for capital. And that's where I want to go, because the truly automatic machine. Here's an interview with Sam Altman, right? Ultimately, OpenAI will capture much of the world's wealth by creating AGI, like artificial general intelligence, and then we'll redistribute the wealth to the people. I don't know, 100 trillion, who cares, right? When AGI does create all that wealth, I don't know what to do with it, but maybe we can ask the AGI for help. Okay, yeah, so we're now trying to build truly automatic machines. That's cool. Maybe we should talk about it. So superintelligence, what is this? We have a long history of thinking of intelligence as practical competence, as like, can you figure out how to do stuff? If I give you a goal, can you figure out how to get there? And Nick Bostrom, in this long tradition, he's like, yeah, intelligence is the effective ability to meet challenges. If I give you an information processing challenge, can you do it? But that's different from wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to get the important things approximately right, to not just like be good at doing stuff, like not just competent, but like, are you picking good things? Or are you like a supervillain? Are you just doing random stuff, right? And the orthogonality thesis he defends, this is pretty much orthodox now. Intelligence and final goals are basically unrelated. So you could have a super intelligent supervillain, right? This is why, like, as you develop more and more powerful AI systems, everyone goes, wow, this is going to be really good or really bad. Like, yeah, you are creating something that's so good at doing stuff, you are probably not going to have middling outcomes. Okay, cool. And then just a word on intelligence explosions. I mean, like, once these things get at our level, they're gonna be better at improving themselves than we are. Like, not just because it's easier for them to like double their RAM, but like being intelligent, if you're competent, part of competency is like, how good are you at like improving yourself? And so there, everyone expects, this is common sense in the AI literature. Like, we basically expect intelligence explosions. That's just how the dynamics will work out. So human level would be a short stop on the way to superhuman intelligence. God knows how long this arrow goes off to the right, but a super intelligence will be way better than you at everything, and their potential so much more. Already, our transistor, like, electricity goes 10 million times slower in your brain than through a chip right now, right? With current technology, right? And even if you're enhanced, you'll be outclassed by this like thing, right? Oh, cool. Okay. And it'll have all these superpowers he goes through. I mean, really, the only reason we rule the earth is we have a slightly expanded set of faculties compared to other animals. Like, elephants have more raw computing power. You just have like a little bit more like slightly different stuff. So you can like talk. This one, intelligence amplification, is the biggest deal. This is just like, can you make yourself smarter? And if you can, then you can get good at anything. Oh, okay, cool. So then Bostrom goes like, oh, well, actually, this could like substitute for human intelligence, and then it could do intellectual work, and then it could do physical labor, like it could design robots better than we could, right? And it could do all our jobs better and cheaper than us. What happens then? This is the number of horses in the US, and it peaks at 25 million in like 1920. And then there are cars. Anyway, so he goes like, well, maybe we'll still keep humans around where there's a basic preference for work done by humans, human art or something. But yeah, human jobs will probably disappear, and we have to figure out how to distribute income. Okay, well, this is what I wanted to get to. What the hell's going on? Because Bostrom's going like, yeah, this looks technically inevitable. Given intelligence explosions, you should expect like a super competent thing to emerge and just like be better than you. And then where is your job, right? And Spencer's like, oh no, what will happen if we don't have enough work? Or my social role, right? My identity, right? Graeber is going to ask more pointedly, what happens when every job is bullshit? When no job is apparently like needed? Which you might think looks socially inevitable under monopoly capitalism. Like, the forces that we talked about may make an outcome like that look really inevitable. And that means we would all be playing the shittiest games imaginable of going to our bullshit job every day. What happened to utopia? Okay, that took me a bit to like set up, but I want to just talk for a few more minutes, and like, here's my intervention. I don't know what to do with this. Okay. So work, play, and suicide. Where I come in, I'm not sure what practically necessary means, because that's supposed to be what distinguishes work from play. Work, you're doing stuff you have to do. Play, you're doing stuff you choose, right? So here's 3 ways of trying to get a grip on practical necessity. You might think we're talking about what's necessary for survival, or necessary for rationality, or maybe necessary for thriving. So necessary for survival, I think, is actually a non-starter, because if I'm like, would you rather die now or get in a coma for 20 years where you're unconscious and never wake up and die then? Everyone's like, who cares, right? Survival per se is like not great. The value of survival is conditional. So ultimate practical necessity needs to be grounded in something else. Thanks, Nagel. Necessary for rationality. Okay, yeah, here we're going to talk about suicide. Hi, Kant. So he thinks the moral law is categorically binding on us as rational creatures, right? If our will's going to accord with reason. And so, for example, he argues suicide, at least under one maxim he looks at is practically irrational and forbidden. He thinks there's something self-contradictory about a will, like striving to eliminate itself, to unmake itself. Okay, but like, let me start with a boring point. Even if it's like irrational, suicide is just as practically possible. So where are we getting to necessity exactly? Because like, in this minimal sense, all obstacles are voluntary if you can kill yourself whenever. So, and that in no way means that your life is not worth living, like even right now before we have the computer in charge, right? So here's, okay, necessary for rationality. You're irrational right now. If you could push a button and become like, just like perfectly rational, would that just improve your practical situation? Is that just necessarily good for you? I don't think that's obvious at all, right? God knows what kind of being you would be on the other end of that. So in what sense can we say rationality is practically necessary? It looks conditional as well. This is a point even Parfit pushes a little bit. He thinks there can be rational irrationality, where it's rational in weird cases for you to make yourself irrational. And so the irrationality isn't a problem. But what does that mean? Well, the point is like, yeah, being irrational in these cases would be better for you. So it looks like what grounds practical reason, the point of rationality isn't to be rational. The point of rationality is practical rationality is to do what's like good for you, to do what's good for us, right? Is we need this language of benefits and harms. If we adopt this though, look what happens. We go, why survive? Oh, so you can thrive, right? So you can do well. What? Why be rational? Well, so you can thrive. It's bad for you to be irrational in some sense, right? Okay, why thrive? This looks like a bad question, right? This looks like a non-starter. That it just looks confused, right? What answer would you want? So if we think about practical necessity in terms of well-being, here are a few things I think fall out of that pretty straightforwardly. One is like this distinction between play and work breaks down, because play can be useful. It's not just something you might do for its own sake, right? Play can also like help you relax or help you improve your practical reasoning or like give you a library of different ways of thinking. Like play can be really useful, kind of like work, right? And meanwhile, work can be really like ultimately good for you, right? Like I think it can be good for us to engage in practical projects where we go like, wait, I'm not in full control here. I can't totally shape what I'm up to. And when you think about that, like 1 second more, wait, that's true in games as well. Like I'm a limited being in a limited world. I can't do anything in a game either, right? So then if this distinction between play and work is like not as helpful, maybe it's worth returning to like, why would we want to work unnecessarily? Which looks like a perverted form of play, right? Yeah, sure, ideology, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But like also work, if work can be good for you, like the real question is, if work is unnecessary, when would it still be good for us, right? Here's my suspicion. I think like a lot of this is built on like weak forms of self-love or self-acceptance that are really conditional on feeling productive or useful or indispensable. And so if we don't feel productive, we would like rather destroy ourselves or utopia, right? But bell hooks goes like, self-love is the foundation of our loving practice. Without it, our other efforts to love fail. And it's built on the ability to give ourselves unconditional love in a way. It's not conditional on feeling useful. I think that actually does like, and as I read Svensson more and more closely, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of weird how conditional it is. You despair in that word. So what should we do? Yeah, UBI, great. But don't just fight to survive. You should fight to like thrive. Like, wait, if no one has to work, why would you just fight for the minimum? Like, go for it, right? But then can we hope for more than a dystopia of just bullshit work for everyone? Here's what the grasshopper says, right? Once we go from scarcity to plenitude to post-scarcity, we're going to play sports and games that are just as big as what our society sets itself to today. Games we've never thought of. And so we need to start the work of devising those games right now, or we'll find ourselves with nothing to do when utopia arrives. So, thanks.